counter-terrorism in an incident like this. Now, nobody who
over the years, many individuals have questioned the official narrative and explanations being offered by the 9/11 Commission and other government agencies. Initially, an investigation of the events was resisted by those in power. If it weren't for the determination of some very tough women who wouldn't take no for an answer, a 9/11 Commission would have never existed. But did a real investigation take place? Was any evidence offered? Many critics of the 9/11 Commission report, including those who sat on the commission, have voiced their concerns over the years, poking large holes in the narrative offered. Omissions and distortions, a whitewash, deceptions, cover-ups. These are the words often repeated when referring to such a report. Evidence for claims made is lacking. In May of 2006, Rob Balsamo was viewing a breaking news broadcast describing the release of the Department of Defense 5 frames video of the Pentagon attack. Glenn Beck claimed, "You can see a plane in 5 seconds, or a naked Michael Moore headed for the buffet," and that this tape should put all those conspiracy theories to rest.
How is this not a plane? Right there. Can we freeze that and show that box? How's that not a plane? That's a big white object of some sort. That's right. It's either a plane or a naked Michael Moore headed for the buffet.
Rob Balsamo was puzzled, as he could not see any 757. He asked himself if there were still unresolved questions regarding 9/11. So he started poking around on the internet, trying to find resources to support the story he'd been told by his government. He didn't want to believe that elements of the U.S. government may have had a hand in the attacks of 9/11, and was on a mission to set the record straight, gathering evidence to support what he'd been told about 9/11. Certainly elements within the U.S. government at such levels would never even propose such absurdity. Mr. Balsamo first came across Operation Northwoods, a proposal offered by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to stage terrorist attacks in the U.S. and blame it on Cuba as justification for war with Cuba. This blew him away, that such elements of society could rise to such high levels of government and then make such absurd proposals. President Kennedy refused such a proposal, and everyone now knows the controversy surrounding John F. Kennedy's death. Consider that 9/11 Commission Chairman Thomas Keane said, "The greatest failure of 9/11 was a lack of imagination." Yet less than 40 years prior, elements of our own government imagined perpetrating such an event. In late summer of 2006, Rob Balsamo co-founded Pilots for 9/11 Truth to formally conduct research on the aviation-related topics of 9/11. Pilots for 9/11 Truth first received a copy of the flight data recorder from the National Transportation Safety Board, claimed to be from American Airlines Flight 77, the aircraft which is alleged to have caused the damage at the Pentagon. Certainly this data would show definitive proof of the attack. Over the years, information and data has been offered by government agencies in an attempt to support the official narrative, usually through lengthy Freedom of Information Act requests, with many forced by appeals. Government agencies have also refused to provide evidence for their claims, or they claim such evidence does not exist to support their story. On trial, the government narrative of events Government policy has handed down a virtual death sentence for many, based on the arguments offered in the official narrative of 9/11. Does the government story prove it's a case beyond and to the exclusion of any reasonable doubt? We would hope so, given all the changes in domestic and foreign policy restricting freedoms, 2 wars which have proven to be the longest in American history, and the millions dead and mounting. You are the jury.
We just engaged all 8 individuals.
Evidence is based on government reports, data, information, and witnesses. Questions asked are: is the government offering supporting evidence for their claims? Is the evidence the government has offered sufficient for their actions? Does the evidence conflict with their story? Has the evidence proven beyond a reasonable doubt justification for their actions at home and across the globe? Expert witnesses will also be offered. Expert witnesses are the only witnesses who are allowed to give their opinions based on their expertise in a court of law. All of the evidence to be presented here, except for one topic, is admissible in a court of law if only a judge would be willing to look at the evidence before throwing out a case as frivolous, preferably one who isn't related to Bush. The Pentagon. Exhibit A. The flight data recorder provided by the NTSB, claimed to be from American Airlines Flight 77. The flight data and cockpit voice recorders were claimed to have been recovered from the Pentagon in the early morning hours, 3 days after 9/11. However, contradictory reports of where the black boxes were found are analyzed and covered by Pilots for 9/11 Truth. One report claims the boxes were found at the entrance hole, while the other claims the boxes were found at the exit. The FDR data was provided to the public through the Freedom of Information Act, but the CVR was denied and claimed to be destroyed. The FDR files, supplied through the Freedom of Information Act, have a create data which shows the files were created before the black boxes are claimed to have been found. The FDR raw file says it was created on September 13th at 11:45 p.m. But the black boxes weren't found until September 14th, shortly before 4 a.m. in the morning, several hours later. Is this proof beyond a reasonable doubt? The chain of custody is certainly in question, but let's see what the data contains, since the government agencies claim it is from American 77, and such data can be admitted into a court of law. Hopefully, the data itself will at least support their story, as it should. Analyzed in Pilots for 9/11 Truth film Flight of American 77, it has been determined the data provided by the NTSB does not support an impact at the Pentagon. The aircraft data shows too high to hit the Pentagon. Vertical speeds too great to be level across the lawn, as seen in the DoD 5 frames video. Pitch angles, which do not coincide with the lack of damage to the foundation of the Pentagon. Hypothetical scenarios based on the data, topography, and obstacles analyzed by expert witnesses Captain Rob Balsamo and aeronautical engineer Jeff Lattis demonstrate the maneuvers are not possible for a standard 757 through aerodynamics. Flight data recorders are used to determine flight safety and are extremely accurate. If the government story we have been told were accurate, the FDR should support the narrative. Pilots for 9/11 Truth have contacted the NTSB and the FBI, questioning such data conflicts with the government story. The NTSB and FBI refuse to comment.
I have no comment on...
Both of the phone recordings with the NTSB and FBI can be found in the Pilots for 9/11 Truth presentation, Flight of American 77. Pilots for 9/11 Truth went further to determine if the data is linked to N644AA, a standard Boeing 757, the aircraft claimed to be dispatched as American Airlines Flight 77. We already know the chain of custody for the data is dubious, an understatement to be sure, but the data itself should link to N644AA. After consulting with FDR experts, aircraft ID and fleet ID parameters in the FDR data are the first parameters an FDR analyst and expert or aircraft accident investigator looks at to determine from what specific aircraft the data was produced. After reviewing the data, these parameters are missing. Such missing parameters would be a huge red flag for any FDR analyst looking at such data. Combined with the missing fleet ID and aircraft ID parameters, the serial and parts numbers to the black boxes are also missing. This is unprecedented. There is no evidence linking the data back to N644AA, the flight alleged to be dispatched as American 77. This creates tremendous doubt with respect to what we've been told by the government. This data is admissible in a court of law. Exhibit B, departure gate and latitude-longitude coordinates based on data. It has been reported that American Airlines Flight 77 departed Washington Dulles International Airport at approximately 08:20 a.m. on the morning of September 11, 2001, allegedly from Terminal Concourse D, Gate 26. Does the flight data recorder positional data provided by the National Transportation Safety Board support such a claim? This illustration is a diagram of Dulles Concourse D and their respective gates. It shows gate D26 on the southwest corner of the terminal. This is the raw latitude-longitude plot based on the information as seen in the raw flight data recorder file provided by the NTSB. As you can see, there is an offset from the runway during departure. This is further evidence which we will get into a bit later. The system generating this data is called an Inertial Reference System, or IRS. Color coding is recognized as: green is the parking spot the night before engine off. Red is engine start after pushback. Yellow M2 is forward movement into a turn. Red M3 is radio altitude at 3 feet. First indication of liftoff from the runway. After adjusting the latitude-longitude offset, the positional data has the aircraft departing a gate further east of gate D26 and on the north side of the concourse. On closer inspection, according to government reports, American Airlines Flight 77 departed gate D26 from Dulles International Airport. The data provided by the NTSB does not support such a pushback. This creates more doubt with the government narrative of events. This evidence, too, is admissible in a court of law. Exhibit C, data frame layout. Pilots for 9/11 Truth have been provided many files through the Freedom of Information Act. One file in particular, a raw flight data recorder file, which is described as a direct download from the flight data recorder, contains code which needs to be decoded for a proper readout in a spreadsheet such as Excel. In order to decode such data, a data frame layout is required. Derived from a generic Boeing data frame layout, American Airlines provided its own custom-made data frame layout which was designed for decoding data from aircraft within the American Airlines fleet, based on airline needs exclusive to American Airlines. The custom-made American Airlines frame layout was unable to decode the data in full, and in some instances, neither the American Airlines data frame layout nor the generic Boeing frame layout were able to be utilized in decoding the data. Why would American Airlines develop their own custom data frame layout if it cannot decode data from their aircraft? Or perhaps the data being provided is not from an American Airlines jet? More doubt of what we've been told. Pilots for 9/11 Truth also found there's no evidence suggesting a hijack had occurred. A flight deck door parameter shows the door closed for the entire flight. No evidence has been provided thus far which shows the flight deck door open in order to facilitate a hijack. Once again, the data does not support what we've been told. Exhibit E, departure gate and full alignment. As we have discussed, according to government reports and recordings, American Airlines Flight 77 departed from gate D26 at Dulles. However, when the latitude-longitude data is adjusted for the 3,000-plus foot offset, the data shows a departure from a gate other than D26. American Airlines requires a full alignment, as opposed to a fast alignment, prior to every flight, with the pilots physically inputting the latitude-longitude coordinates of the gate provided by navigational charts into their navigational system. The aircraft should have never left the gate with such a large error within its navigational system. Although some aircraft have the ability to update its position in flight, an update is very different from an alignment. Any updates in flight will not be accurate if the initial alignment was not achieved at the gate. Expert witnesses and American Airlines captains, including captains and pilots from other airlines and not affiliated with Pilots for 9/11 Truth, had this to say after viewing the latitude-longitude offset shown in the data. Again, the data does not support the government's story when it should. Exhibit F, Auto Alignment and GPS. Military aircraft were equipped with GPS, global positioning systems, long before GPS was offered for commercial use. When equipped, they can auto-align the inertial reference system. N644AA, American Airlines Flight 77, was not equipped with a GPS. The aircraft was built in 1991, long before GPS was used as a primary navigational aid for navigation. However, when one looks through the data, it shows a GPS as operational. How can a GPS be OPER if the data is reported to come from an aircraft which doesn't have a GPS? The data shows that the latitude-longitude plots auto-align with radar plots in flight after departure. American Airlines 757 aircraft do not have the capability of in-flight alignment, nor would such an aircraft depart with such a large error and an IRS as its primary source for navigation. It is impossible for an IRS-equipped American Airlines jet to get accurate position information if the system was not aligned at the gate. The aircraft needs to be stationary for proper alignment, or else the navigational device will have large errors and could perhaps be fatal. According to American Airlines 757-767 Captain Ralph Kolstad, who has actual flight time in N644AA, if the inertial reference system, IRS, is lost in flight or shows large errors, an emergency has to be declared. The aircraft is required to sit stationary for more than 10 minutes in order to obtain a full alignment of the inertial reference system prior to every flight. This claim is supported by the American Airlines 757-767 operating manual pre-flight checklist as well. How can an auto-align occur airborne if American Airlines aircraft do not have this capability, nor a GPS? This is more evidence demonstrating the data did not come from an American Airlines jet and is admissible in a court of law. Exhibit G, no forensic evidence. The limited number of aircraft parts found at the site were never identified as coming from N644AA. The FBI claims there was no reason to identify the parts, as they never felt the aircraft identity was in question. DNA analysis was claimed to be performed. However, DNA evidence does not determine aircraft identification. DNA evidence determines the person who the DNA belongs to. It does not determine the performance of an aircraft, nor what type of parts may or may not have been installed on an aircraft, or any modifications which may or may not have taken place. DNA chain of custody is also in question. Citizen investigators have taken it upon themselves to record and gather witness statements firsthand. Many witnesses, including Pentagon police officers, observed the aircraft which is claimed to have caused the damage at the Pentagon on a path which is physically and aerodynamically impossible to have caused the damage for any conventional aircraft. Citizen investigation team interviewed witnesses in crucial vantage points to the attack. All of them corroborate each other as observing the aircraft on a flight path which is irreconcilable with the damage. Detailed analysis and recorded interviews can be found in Citizen Investigation Team National Security Alert and Pilots for 9/11 Truth, 9/11 Attack on the Pentagon. Some witnesses also state they saw the aircraft fly over the Pentagon immediately after the explosion at the building. These witnesses are certainly admissible in a court of law, and many have specified that they will testify. Pilots for 9/11 Truth also petitioned the NTSB for the flight data recorder information claimed to be from United Airlines Flight 93. A detailed analysis is presented in Flight of United 93. Exhibit H, Flight Data and Cockpit Voice Recorder. The flight data and cockpit voice recorders were claimed to have been removed. The FDR data was provided to the public through the Freedom of Information Act, but the CVR, the cockpit voice recorder, was denied. There's no evidence linking the data to the claimed aircraft, N591UA, a standard Boeing 757, dispatched as United 93. The serial numbers and part numbers are mysteriously absent. Again, this is unprecedented. Exhibit I, the NTSB flight path data and animation reconstruction. The NTSB approach path and altitude does not support eyewitness statements. All altitude data on the northern approach contradicts witness statements published by the New York Times. The impact angle, according to Flight Data Recorder, does not support an almost vertical impact, as the government story and crater suggests. Speeds and aircraft maneuvering are well outside the envelope of a standard 757. Such abrupt maneuvering well above the maneuvering speed of the aircraft will cause structural failure. This is what happened to American Flight 587 while making maneuvers at departure speed. We will get more into the reasons for V-speeds set by the manufacturer and their definitions later. Exhibit J, Environmental Reports. Environmental analysis and reports found no soil contamination of jet fuel after testing 5,000 to 6,000 yards of earth, including 3 ground wells. The smoke plume photographed by a witness does not suggest a jet fuel-rich explosion.
Breaking news now, Eyewitness News in Warwick, where crews are cleaning up after an airplane fuel spill. We're told it happened at the North Star Aviation near TF Green Airport. A spokesperson tells us a truck was filling up an underground fuel tank when about 25 gallons of it spilled. Workers had to evacuate the building. We're told workers were able to suck up most of the fuel, and the DEM is investigating.
Yet no such contamination found when a 757 carrying thousands of gallons of jet fuel crashes into the earth? Exhibit K, no forensic evidence. Once again, the limited number of aircraft parts found at the site were never identified as coming from N591UA. Contradictory reports place the parts in Iron Mountain, a facility described where the government hides its deepest secrets.
There are dark secrets in the mountain, too. The charred evidence from United Flight 93 brought down by terrorists on 9/11 is heavily guarded in one of the underground vaults. It's no secret who their biggest client is.
The biggest client by number of employees would be sections of the federal government.
Yet the FBI claims the parts were given back to United Airlines 2 weeks after 9/11. Witnesses. Witness observations of the approach path contradict a northern approach as described by popular mechanics and the U.S. government. Several witnesses observed the aircraft approaching from the southeast over Indian Lake and from the south prior to witnessing the explosion. Parts found in New Baltimore, 8 miles southeast of the crater, is a direct contradiction to the northern approach claimed by the U.S. government. There's an abundance of evidence with respect to the World Trade Center and its collapse. However, being aviation experts, pilots for 9/11 Truth stick to their expertise: aviation. The speeds reported for the attack aircraft on the World Trade Center are excessive for a standard Boeing 767. The speed data for the alleged Pentagon and Shanksville aircraft are also excessive for a standard Boeing 757. This is not up for debate, as the aircraft exceeded the maximum operating limits of standard Boeing 757 and 767, according to radar and data provided by government agencies. The details are analyzed in the Pilots for 9/11 Truth presentation, 9/11 World Trade Center Attack. However, more evidence has been gathered since. Speed analysis was done by the NTSB for the World Trade Center strike aircraft using radar from the surrounding New York City airports and from the Radar Evaluation Squadron. Exhibit L, Flight Data and Cockpit Voice Recorder. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorders were alleged to have not been found in the World Trade Center rubble by the FBI, but witnesses claimed to have found the recorder, and the NTSB has claimed to receive them, according to journalist Dave Lindorf, all of which can be called to the stand in a court of law. Exhibit M, No Forensic Evidence. Once again, no forensic evidence has been offered by government agencies linking aircraft parts found at the World Trade Center site to the aircraft alleged to have crashed there. Exhibit N, Radar Data and Tower Impact. Since the flight data recorder data is unavailable for the World Trade Center strike aircraft, pilots for 9/11 Truth look to other data to determine if it supports the government narrative of events. Radar data analyzed by the NTSB alleges 510 knots for the aircraft which impacted the South Tower and 430 knots for the aircraft which is observed to strike the North Tower. The data for the North Tower impact does seem possible, but the South Tower impact is not possible for a standard 767. This is a typical VG diagram used by pilots to determine aircraft performance. Each aircraft has its own VG diagram, or one can be constructed using the V-speeds established by the manufacturer. As you can see, the flight envelope is defined by V-speeds and G-load limits. V-speeds are set by the manufacturer based on wind tunnel and flight testing. G-loads are set by standard limits set by the FAA for type aircraft. Manufacturers design a prototype, place it in a wind tunnel, and test the airframe efficiency and performance. Maneuvering speed is noted as VA. This speed is critical, as any speed above VA could cause structural damage or failure, depending on maneuvering. any speed below VA, and the aircraft will stall, thereby not jeopardizing the structural integrity of the airframe. VA is mostly referred to as VRA on large airliners. VRA is rough air penetration speed. As a passenger, when aircraft enter turbulence, you probably noticed the seatbelt sign turned on, perhaps an announcement made by the pilots, and then the aircraft slowing down. This is so they do not damage the airplane. The pilots are slowing down below the aircraft VRA, rough air penetration rated speed. VRA for the 767 is 290 knots, 220 knots below the speeds reported for the airplane, which was observed to strike the South Tower. The next speed is VMO, the maximum operating limit of the aircraft. This speed is determined through margin of safety calculations mandated by the FAA, based on VD. VD is the end of the flight envelope and the start of the structural failure zone for every airplane certified. Jet pilots are not given the VD speed of their aircraft in their performance books, as the manufacturers do not want line pilots anywhere near the VD for their airframe, and this is why. Manufacturers increase speeds during wind tunnel testing until buffeting is observed or other limits are reached, such as flutter, control issues with respect to center of gravity versus center of pressure, and so on. At the onset of these issues, VD is then established for that particular airframe. Test pilots then go out to test the actual aircraft to see if they can really achieve those speeds. If experiencing the onset of the issues discussed prior to the VD established in the wind tunnel, VD is then lowered, thereby affecting and lowering the aircraft VMO through safety margin calculations. Or the airframe is modified to achieve a higher VD with success. VD is a hard limit, meaning there is no additional margin of safety above VD. G-load limits do have a safety factor of 150% after manufacturer test, but as it concerns aircraft speed, VD is the end of the flight envelope and the start of the structural failure zone. This does not mean an aircraft will fall apart 1 knot over VD. However, many aircraft have suffered structural failure prior to VD. A good example is American Airlines Flight 587. According to reports, the airplane lost its vertical stabilizer at departure speeds due to maneuvering. Some aircraft have also exceeded VD, but not by much. Anyone who flies an aircraft beyond such a limitation is now considered a test pilot, as such speeds are never tested during certification. However, based on precedent, we can see the limitations set by the manufacturer are pretty accurate. In 9/11 World Trade Center attack, pilots for 9/11 Truth discussed the Egypt Air 990 crash. It was determined that Egypt Air 990 suffered in-flight structural failure just 5 knots into the structural failure zone, as determined by Boeing and as defined by the Illustrated Guide to Aerodynamics. The aircraft, which was observed to hit the South Tower, was traveling 90 knots into the structural failure zone of a standard 767 and 150 knots over a standard 767 max operating limit. The aircraft was observed to remain in control and stable while diving 10,000 feet at 500 to 550 knots for well over a few minutes, pulling Gs to precisely hit a target with a 25-foot margin for error each side of wingtip. There has never been an aircraft to have exceeded its maximum operating limitations by such a wide margin, over 150 knots. Its maneuvering speed by an even wider margin, more than 220 knots, pulled Gs, remained in control, stable, or held together. Pilots for 9/11 Truth challenge anyone to find one positively identified aircraft that has outperformed its own limitations by such a wide margin and remained in control. Only one aircraft exists on the record and is available to show as precedent as having exceeded its standard limitations: a DC-8, which was modified. So how can such extreme performance reported for the 9/11 aircraft be explained? Well, either the speeds reported are wrong, in which case you should think twice about flying into the New York City terminal area, as the speeds reported were calculated by the same radar used to assign speeds to aircraft departing and arriving the New York City area daily. If the speeds reported by the NTSB are inaccurate, aircraft would be running into each other on foggy days at all major hubs throughout the world using airport surveillance radar. The only other possibility is that the aircraft which was observed to strike the South Tower was modified to increase performance beyond the capability of a standard 767. The government story, once again, does not hold water.
The U.S. government and government agencies have not provided any evidence to support their claims, yet there is a growing mountain of evidence which conflicts with their story. How can we draft legislation restricting freedoms at home on such a flimsy case with evidence to the contrary? How can we ask our brothers, sisters, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters to die in a war based on such a weak story lacking evidence? And in fact, evidence to the contrary. If American Flight 77 departed gate D26 from Dulles Airport, then this data came from a different source and not from American 77, tail number November 644 Alpha Alpha, as claimed. The aircraft which departed a gate north of the terminal is tracked all the way to the Pentagon based on latitude-longitude data, and an in-flight alignment based on GPS. November 644 Alpha Alpha did not have this capability. This data came from an aircraft with more capability than American Airlines Flight 77. Some have argued the data could be fake, completely fabricated, and this certainly can be a possibility, especially given the fact that the file has a create date prior to the FDR recovery. This is only more reason to look closely at the data. If the data were fabricated, it is as alarming as being authentic due to the fact fabricating such evidence is a felony, especially when distributed through the Freedom of Information Act. All aviation-related data provided through government agencies outperform the alleged aircraft by a wide margin. Perhaps this is why the aircraft fleet and ID fields were missing from the data claimed to be from American 77? Why the black box serial numbers are missing? Why none of the aircraft were positively identified through aircraft parts allegedly recovered at the sites? Domestic and foreign policy restricting our freedoms, the government is required to provide evidence for their claims when handing down a virtual death sentence for millions across the globe. And since there is overwhelming evidence to the contrary, judges and Congress are required to grant subpoena power in the form of discovery so we can all determine the truth. Obama ran on a platform of transparency in government, yet we still do not have any answers, rather more restrictions on our freedoms, NSA spying on Americans, and continuing wars. 9/11, never forget. Demand answers, prosecute the guilty, demand justice for the innocent.